All right. A proposed social media ban for most minors, backed by families affected by the Parkland shooting and endorsed by Stand with Parkland, aims to address youth mental health concerns. The legislation, HB number 1, would prevent anyone under 16, that's under 16 years of age, in Florida from having social media accounts, reflecting a broader effort to combat mental health issues exacerbated by screen time. Let's go. Good day to you, JD. How are you?
I'm doing well, David. Good morning to you. How are you?
Alive and kicking. Thank you. So,
Mhm.
HB1 is one of the signature pieces of legislation offered by Speaker Renner. And the thought was that the governor was on board with this. Governor DeSantis was on board. This is something that they cared on, worked on with, and had some broad support. Now it's in front of the governor, is sitting on his desk, and there's some doubt of whether or not he's going to sign this legislation. Your thoughts?
I think that's exactly right. At the beginning of the session, I mean, clearly HB1, it was a priority. Um, and it felt like there was some unison between the governor and the speaker at that point until the governor dropped out of the primaries. And then all of a sudden, some cracks started being seen between the two of them on this issue. I've heard a couple of recordings and one time live with the governor speaking, saying he was really not sure he was going to support it. It actually sounded like it was pretty clear he wasn't going to support it.
Correct.
Um, one of the one of the items that I saw him speak on, he was citing potential legal costs. That clearly wasn't a concern to them last year because they passed tons of stuff that they're going to get sued on and thrown out of court and have to defend everything else. Things that just clearly were never going to make it through the court system, but they passed it just as a marketing item for their base. I think it's just red meat for the base again,
Right.
even though they know it's never going to stand the test of the court system.
Right.
Um,
A lot of the legislation helps support Governor DeSantis's war
yeah,
on woke,
yeah,
his
that's right.
battles in the cultural wars. Um, I understand this legislation to have support from the Parkland organization
That's what it appears like.
regarding, concerns about the mental health of youth. And being a behavioral health professional, working with children and families
Mhm.
for the great majority of my adult professional career, social media has become a problem.
That's right.
Again, as children, the ultimate responsibility is on the parent and or guardian of that particular child to put some limitations on the screen time that minors have.
Yes,
The first thing is not every child needs a phone or
right.
mobile device, except for the one they need for school.
But it's become a babysitter for a lot of parents.
It has. And I was talking to a therapist here in Orange County, and she counsels parents and their children. And it the parent had a concern about the child's behavior.
Hmm.
And my friend said to the parent, you need to start imposing consequences. And some of the recommendations was, less screen time, take away the devices. And
Hmm.
the comment from the parent, the response from the parent was like, "Oh wow, I never thought about that."
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like we have in the last few generations kind of gone further and further off the rails with being able to parent. It I hate to say this is related to the closing of mental health institutions, but it certainly feels like that's a part of the problem. And we've got people that are parents that have their own set of mental health issues that they're not getting addressed. And then they have children. There's not a high chance of that having a good outcome. And then now some of those second generations are having children with parents and grandparents that are, I don't necessarily want to say mentally unstable, but aren't in the position that they need to be to raise small children. And we seem to be just getting just further and further out of bounds. Um, this bill I looked up a little bit, did some research on. I wasn't 100% familiar with when it first came out, beginning of session. I did skim through it real quick. I was adamantly against it. It just, you know, the I think we spoke before. I've been a Republican my whole life. We're supposed to be the party of small government. There's
Correct.
nothing about this last 2 years in session in the state of Florida that's a party of small government. And we're supposed to be the party that entrusts parents to raise their children. Every other time they want something to fall back on, that's the position that they glam onto. Now all of a sudden, with this, the parents are no longer qualified to regulate their children's behavior. And I just have a really hard time swallowing that. There's a whole bunch of this thing that I don't like. Now I understand the intent, like you said. I get it, I'm no expert on that. I've got grown children and grandchildren. I think there's some truth to the fact that social media is hurting these kids. Um, but I'm not sold that this is a solution. Now, in the meantime, after I read it the first time, I spoke with, some of two of my daughters and some of the other friends that have children, and they actually had a position that surprised me. I expected them as parents to be like, oh, heck no, the government needs to stay out of that. But a couple of the people I spoke to, parents, actually kind of liked it. And their reasoning was
Hmm.
they wanted the government to be the bad guy for them to lock their kid out of social media. So instead of them parenting
Right.
their child, they didn't, and these weren't my two daughters, but other in that same generation, it felt like, whether it was true or not, they felt like they didn't have the standing with their own children to regulate their behavior. And so since they kind of seemed like they were incapable of it in their own eyes, they wanted they wanted the government to make a law so they could just use them as the bad guy. It's like, well, it's not me locking you out of Facebook. You're just not allowed to be there. That doesn't seem like a great reason, particularly to pass a law that regulates the other 90% of parents that are capable of raising their children and teaching them morals and behavior and things. Um, and then you've got all the technicalities on this thing that I think make it really difficult to administer. And that's something that the last couple of years I've seen up here, that they'll grab onto a goal for something and just completely be oblivious to the fact that it's virtually unworkable when it gets on
Right.
the field. And they'll just go back to their constituents like, oh, we passed a bill to regulate that, and they'll drop it down through some state level organizations, which has two problems. They're not involved in the outcome of that, and you've got unelected bureaucrats down in those levels generating rules and regulations, and and then it gets tied up in the court system. This is way off subject for today, but it's like RCID, when the government went after Disney on that, and I, having lived in Osceola County since 1960, way before Disney, I do think that RCID did outlive its usefulness to some extent. But the
The
reason the government went after them,
the
government
Reedy Creek
what's that?
district. It was the Reedy. You're referring to the Reedy Creek
Yes,
district. Okay.
yeah, yes. So then they substitute the Central Florida Tourism District that has a board, at least from the 30,000-foot level, when you look at it, appears to be nothing but political gifts back to donors. And I'm not sure those people are able to run a 7-Eleven, and that's not a criticism on people that own and run 7-Elevens. But
Sure.
the RCID was an organization that, it regulates the roads, the water, the sewer, all the municipal type functions of Disney. That's a big job, and that really needs to be a board made up of probably almost entirely engineers of some sort, or
I can see that. Sure.
highly technically, educated people for those. Um, so, and I think Disney's going to end up winning on that. I could be way off. I could be wrong, but I think Disney's ultimately going to prevail on that lawsuit back there, and it's going to cause problems. Um, and that's just another example of them doing things that just won't stand the test of the court system. On this here, this applies to residents. I think it ended up under 16. You've got a whole ton of visitors to the state and all these tourism functions. Well, just on everything around the state. It doesn't regulate them at all. Um, you have age verification required, which seems to me to just be another opportunity for some. It's required that it's not a government agency doing the age verification. So it just sets up another opportunity from some organization to demand personal information from people that want to prove, you and I included, because we'd have to prove we're not 16, under 16.
That's right.
And now all of a sudden there's some databases, and there's language in it that says, oh, they have to destroy the information. But we all know once it goes through the internet, who knows what servers and what countries and where it goes through. There's no guarantee that information doesn't get out and misused. Um,
Exactly. And,
it,
and it's something that we've talked about so much about the right to privacy.
right,
And this is a slow encroachment upon our right to privacy, our right
absolutely.
to privacy of information, and the right to privacy of self
Hmm.
and of the individual. And I have to echo what you were saying about, conservatives, Republicans are always known to believe in small government, and this is incredible overreach. The intentions are maybe good. However, the outcome can become so much more that was not intended.
Hmm.
And this is a slow march towards the erosion of individual rights, in my belief. And,
Absolutely.
and then again, this bill meeting constitutional muster. I don't think it will. And like you said earlier, and also off of camera, how many more times do the Florida legislature and the governor pass legislation? It gets challenged in court, and the
Hmm.
governor and the legislature lose. How,
That's right.
how much more can we take of this?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, those are all great points. It's we're just headed down a path that's not in the citizens' best interest, it, and it's not Republican values, at least historically, not Republican values. Um, and every other issue, they want to scream parental rights, parental rights, parental rights.
Right.
But now all of a sudden, because it
Taking this.
doesn't happen to fall into what they want to accomplish, oh wait, parents aren't qualified for this.
Right.
Um, they can go in and challenge a book at the library, but they can't approve their kid to be on social media. And there's a lot of far other ranging problems with this. That you know, there's teachers that communicate through social media for lessons, and you have students that communicate with teachers sometimes through social media on the lessons if they have questions at homework. Um, at the beginning of this, you cited that this is backed by some of the Parkland or the Parkland organization, which
Yes.
is one of the victims' parents.
Correct.
And I understand any of their needs to have to try to come to grips with this through any means possible. I get that. There's no criticism, but this bill and the backup to it makes it sound like the Parkland parents support this. I'm not sure that that's true. I don't know if they ever took a poll of the parents. It's just this one organization that happens to have that name and that link. Um,
Correct.
yeah,
Tony Montalto.
yes, correct.
Tony
That's right. That's the
Montalto.
name, as I remember. And ironically, a lot of what we know about Parkland, the Texas shooting, the recent one, is that kids have access to their phones and social media while these horrendous events are going on. And
Yes,
and so if they're not on that social media, there's an opportunity that we wouldn't know some of the things we know. Um,
that's true.
and I don't know what it would be in particular, but there's clearly something would not get through that is now getting blasted out in the social media during these events. Um, and clearly something's going wrong with society. These shootings didn't happen when I was a kid, and
Not like
um,
this.
the,
Correct.
none. Every kid had a pocket knife on him from the time he started school. Nobody cut anybody. Every
Right.
truck in the student parking lot at St. Cloud High School had a gun rack in the back window, guns hanging in the gun rack, and had the windows down and the door unlocked. Nobody shot anybody. Um, Hunting season, even up north where I went to school in northern Ohio, first day of hunting season, the kids would go out in the morning and go hunting. They would get on the bus with their gun in the gun case, come to school, put the gun in the locker for the day, and when they went home, get on the bus and go home. When you tell people stories like that nowadays, they think you're crazy and that you're lying.
Right.
But that was society back then, and now something is going horribly wrong. And social media could very well. I'm no expert on this, but this could very well be a big part of it. We need to figure that out because we can't keep going through situations where these innocent children are being victimized in these mass shootings.
Right. Right.
Um, and oddly enough, I think the statistics on who those mass shooters are, if you look, are probably not who a lot of people are not the people that people think they are. Um, and it's just it's just nuts that's going on. Part of that, I think, and this probably won't ring true with a lot of people, but we've turned these schools since the Denver shootings out there, the original ones 20 some years ago, into gun-free zones. That's just screaming to the bad guy that they're an open target. And we've put more and more and more security to the point where these schools look like, you know, a prison. They've got
Exactly.
fences
And
and
lockdown.
wire on
Yeah.
the fences and locked doors. When I was a kid, after school, we had an opportunity to go and use all the outdoor recreational areas at these schools, the elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. You go get a pickup game of basketball or all kinds of things because they weren't fenced in. Now, those public assets are off limits to these kids. They're living in these neighborhoods. There's not parks close by where we would have
Mhm.
went to school and played basketball. Um, but the schools still aren't or don't appear to be any safer than they were 10 or 15 years ago when this phenomenon started kind of coming on. The bad actors still can figure out how to get in there and they can do damage. Um, and like I started this with, I think part of that is it's a gun-free zone. I'm not advocating necessarily that teachers carry guns, but before nobody knew if they did, and some of them probably did. A lot of them probably
Right.
didn't. But if you're a bad guy going into something with these type of events, these people almost always pick a soft target, someplace where they know they have a
Always.
certain
That's
amount of time to do what they want to do. And no matter how well-meaning the law enforcement people are, although Parkland's a bad example of this, but normally, no matter how well-meaning the law enforcement people are, by the time they get to the scene, they assess what's going on, they get in and they stop what's going on, is still at the very best minutes that this person is in there creating death and destruction. And it only takes them a short time to do They could be on the scene and reacting properly in 10 minutes, but in 10 minutes time, somebody on this kind of a mission has done a lot of damage.
right. And
Where
JJ, oh, go ahead.
no, that's right.
I was going to say, in closing, for me, this does not address the underlying causes of mental health or the issue of mental health in our youth, in our society in general.
Hmm.
Uh, Again, being in this field for well over 20 years, 30 years, mental health, the access to mental health has been less of a priority uh, in comparison to access to our physical health. And until we make it a priority in our health system, um, band aid solutions like HB1 is what it is, a band aid solution. And there's always going to be a workaround. There always is.
Yeah,
And there's going to be 16, 13, 12, 40-year-olds. I know 40-year-olds who have a device in their face constantly.
yeah,
And we have to get back to, parents understanding their role in the upbringing of their children, and that the introduction of these devices and social media
hmm,
has to be monitored
yep,
and has to be prioritized as an issue affecting our children.
yeah.
Your
I
final word?
agree. Um, now the mental health thing, I'm not sure. I agree with you about 90% of that. But ironically, there weren't mental health counselors in schools when I was a kid, and we didn't have this problem. I think I'm sure there were kids that had problems, but I'm not even sure the school systems had a mental health counselor, let alone every school.
Right.
And
No one's they had the name school counselor or maybe, school social worker. I mean, we were
yeah,
sent to this principal's office and she was the
yeah,
school social worker.
yeah, yeah, it had a different outcome than
Right.
getting someone to talk to you and pat you on the head.
Yes.
We'd end up getting sent out into the hallway, and there'd be a coach somewhere close that got called down there with a paddle in his hand, and that was
That's
the end of
right.
that.
That's right.
Yeah, I made the
That's how
mistake
it
one
was
time.
for
We
us.
were talking in study hall. My best friend and I, we got called out in the hallway. So he gets paddled first with one of our wrestling coaches, and he knocks Nelson about 10 foot forward when he hit him. And I start laughing. That was a true mistake in judgment because it was
Yeah.
like, Mr.
Yeah.
Davis, you think that's funny? Step on up. And it's like,
Hmm.
yeah, that didn't seem quite as funny when he got done. But
Yeah,
anyway,
times have definitely changed.
yeah, they have. Yeah. Um, so I don't know. We haven't really solved much with this other than just went round and round about a bunch of issues in it. And I do kind of see a need for it, but I just don't think this is the approach to fixing that.
I believe the governor is going to not sign it for whatever political reason that's going on between him and Speaker Renner.
Hmm.
It is what it is. However, again, this is big government, uh, government as the caretaker, government as the babysitter,
Hmm.
intervening where they really shouldn't. There should be more emphasis on a public campaign letting parents know this is
Yeah,
your responsibility.
that's right. I agree. And most of these people have a political agenda of their own, which muddies the water. Uh, the governor's is clearly visible at this point, or at least seems to be visible. What drove him last year and through here at this point. I've heard, and I have no idea whether this has even a morsel of truth to it. I've heard the speaker's goal is to run for attorney general in the state at some point, and
Hello.
so kind of interesting stuff. You may know last year when this class came in, their first session, they choose or towards the end of it, they vote to choose who will be the upcoming speaker when that class becomes a senior class. Um,
Right.
the that's normally a relatively hands-off affair. It wasn't last year. The speaker and the governor stepped in and forced that to a particular person whose
Hmm.
husband happens to be a Florida Supreme Court judge.
Mm.
Now they're very nice people. We've been in their house for dinner. They're very, very, very nice people.
Right.
But it feels inappropriate to me when they're forcing this representative down the throat of everybody else there instead of letting the process unfold. And it's a messy process with people trying to jockey for position to be the future speaker. But they come in and said, A, it's going to be a woman, so that wiped out more than half of the choices, and they just forced this candidate down everybody's throat. And this comment is nothing personal towards her. They're great people, but then her husband's a Florida Supreme Court judge, and now all of a sudden I'm hearing that the speaker just happens to want to run, and this may not have any truth, for attorney general, and it just feels like wow, this is just really convoluted.
Wow.
So
Wow. I don't know what to say. I mean,
it
politics.
business as usual in the capital, whether it's the state of Florida, any other state in this country, or Washington,
That's true.
unfortunately.
And for our listeners and our viewers, this is some really good information that JD just shared with us, and we want to know what you think. What do you think about what JD just said, and what we were discussing about mental health here in America, the mental health of our children, social media, the importance and its intrusion into our lives. Please like, comment, we especially want to hear your comments. We'll love to hear what you have to say,
Right?
and let all your friends, family, those politicals, influencers, electeds that you know, if they're into politics or just what's happening here in our beautiful state of Florida, share this with them and share all of our properties with them. The Morning Constitution, of course, the David Washington Show, Countertop Politics, and the flagship podcast. You can't make this shit up. JD, I appreciate it.
You're
Any
welcome.
closing
And
words?
if anyone has questions of something I've said, if they'll send you that question, no problem. I'll be happy to get it answered. If it's addressed to me, I'll be happy, and you and I'll get together and we'll send them back an answer to that.
That's perfect. And we're going to have to get your socials and everything where people can reach you individually too. So we'll work on that and have that available for everybody.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. That's JD. I'm David Washington. This is You Can't Make This Shit Up. We'll see you the next time.
See you, everyone.